In the past, during the time of Chinese civilization and the time of the rule of imperial families, when the emperor married a number of women and rejected some of them and neglected them, they had no choice but to abandon the emperor and leave, let alone the idea of marrying a man other than the emperor who was neglecting them and favoring other women. But with the change of laws in China, she was able, the wife of a Chinese emperor did what no woman of her stature before her could do. Wenzhou was born on December 20th, 1909 AD, and her father was a middle-ranking official in the court of the Qing imperial family. She was born during the last years of the rule of this imperial family before its rule ended with the deposition of the child Emperor Puyi in 1911 AD, and the official imperial rule of China ended after more than 2,000 years of emperors ruled in China turned into a republic. But the new government allowed Puyi to remain nominally emperor and allowed members of the Qing imperial family to remain in the Forbidden City. During that period, the Wenzhou family lived a difficult period financially, especially since her father died before her birth. When she was 8 years old, her mother sent her to study at a boarding elementary school in Beijing. Wenzhou excelled in her studies well and was an excellent student. Marriage. After Wenzhou's mother heard this news, she decided with Wenzhou's uncle to enter the imperial palace so that she would be chosen to become the empress, that is, the official wife. Bad, and Puyi saw the girls alike in shape, so he randomly chose the girl, and his choice fell on the image of Wenzhou, and one of the wives of the former emperor refused to choose him, because Wenzhou was not beautiful, and she suggested that he choose another girl for her beauty, Wenzhou. Wenzhou was the same age as Puyi and from a noble family, and the debate raged between the wives of the former emperor between supporting Puyi's choice of Wenzhou in opposition to his choice of her. In the end, until Puyi stopped the discussion, he agreed to make Wenzhou was his official wife, the empress, and he made Wenzhou his subordinate wife or concubine. Puyi's age at the time of the wedding was 16 years, while Wenzhou's age was 13. Since the beginning of her entry into the palace, she was far from the emperor and lived in a different palace from his palace. Since the beginning of the relationship, Puyi did not favor her and preferred the company of Empress Wenzhou. She used to go to the main palace, greet Emperor Puyi, greet the wives of the former emperor, greet Emperor Wenzhou, and then return to her palace. In order to spend her free time in the palace, she practiced various hobbies, such as reading and writing. She was polite, tactful, and kind to the servants. She was cold towards her, while she and Empress Wenzhou had a competitive relationship, but Wenzhou continued to respond respectfully to the Empress's letters, and the two used to write in the letters sent between them in both Chinese and English, and the relationship between them was also bad because of Wenzhou's jealousy, especially since she saw Wenzhou's presence threatening her status as empress, and a lot Puyi was not on Wenzhou's side, and Wenzhou described feeling lonely those days, especially on the long nights. Life continued like this until 1924 AD, when a warlord named Feng seized the capital, Beijing, and ordered the family of Emperor Puyi to be exiled from the Forbidden City. After that, Puyi and Wenzhou visited the Wenzhou family. Wenzhou met her mother after years of separation, and Puyi decided to seek the help of the Japanese to regain his throne, but Wenzhou advised him not to, because nothing good will happen from the Japanese. However, Puyi did not listen to her advice, and Wenzhou went with him and Wenzhou to the Japanese legation, where they were treated as prisoners of war. Puyi relied on the Japanese to regain his throne, and because she protested strongly in front of him, he took a feather duster and hit her with it, and it was a shock to Wenzhou because it was the first time that Puyi hit her, and it was in front of the people, and this behavior impressed Wenzhou. In February 1925, Wenzhou moved with Puyi and Wenzhou to the garden of a villa known as Jing Garden in Tianjin, and they spent their days there for a while. Rooms on the second floor, while Wenzhou lives in a room on the first floor. Puyi would go out and take Wenzhou with him and leave Wenzhou alone, and sometimes if he was in a good mood he would take Wenzhou with him. Wenzhou used to spend her free time reading or writing poetry, and although they lived a luxurious life, it was not good for Wenzhou. If she got a luxurious gift from Puyi, it was Wenzhou she demands the same gift, and if Wenzhou got a luxurious gift, Wenzhou was asking for the same gift. However, life continued to get worse for Wenzhou because of Wenzhou's bad treatment of her. In June 1931, she was eating her food in the garden and spit by mistake when Wenzhou saw her and considered this the behavior was rude to her, and although Wenzhou apologized and said that it was a mistake, she did not accept her excuse and informed Puyi, who ordered that Wenzhou be locked in her room as punishment for her, and he was ordering the servants to go and discipline Wenzhou and constantly criticize her. After a month, Wenzhou could not bear this life anymore, so she took a pair of scissors and tried to kill herself, but a servant took it from her. He quickly told Puyi what happened and said to let Wenzhou complete her play. Days later, she took a pair of scissors and attempted suicide again, but the servant saved her and she was wounded, and Puyi realized that she had actually tried to kill herself. He ordered to bring Wenzhou, Wenzhou's older sister, to calm her down, and after her sister visited her, she persuaded her of the idea of divorce, which became legal in the new Chinese Republic, and that continuing with Puyi would not work anything at all. An emperor's wife had never before submitted a divorce herself, but with encouragement from her sister, she decided to divorce from Puyi. After Wenzhou asked Puyi to allow her to take Wenzhou to the city to entertain her, he agreed, and the two went to a hotel and met 3 lawyers. Here, Wenzhou and the lawyers informed Puyi's servants that Wenzhou would not return with them, and they told Puyi that Wenzhou wanted to divorce him. This news shocked Puyi, and he was very angry at this request. He sent to bring Wenzhou from the hotel, but she was not there. The servants met the 3 lawyers who handed over the divorce papers to the servants, and they gave the papers to Puyi, who intensified his anger at this behavior that brought shame on him in the Qing dynasty, and ordered a search for Wenzhou's house. To no avail, and this news began to spread in the newspapers. Wenzhou demanded a divorce in July 1931 AD, and the request continued for months. Puyi refused Wenzhou's conditions of returning or even meeting them alone, so she met him with lawyers. In the end, Puyi acquiesced in accepting the request for divorce on the condition that Wenzhou not remarry. The divorce took place officially in October 1931 AD, and Puyi paid 55,000 Chinese yuan as an alimony to Wenzhou. Wenzhou was removed from her position and imperial titles, and she returned to live as a commoner. She was rejected by her family and saddened by the news of her mother's death, but this decision was better for her because she saved herself from an unexpected future. Months after the divorce, Japan occupied the Manchurian region and established a state under its administration called Manchukuo, and they appointed Puyi as its emperor, and Wenzhou traveled with him and became the Empress of Manchukuo. He admits that he wronged her and blamed Wenzhou's treatment of her, and that she was the one who caused his divorce from Wenzhou, as Puyi and Wenzhou's relationship worsened after that. After the divorce, Wenzhou moved to her mother's house and brought servants, but after the money ran out, she fired the servants and moved to a smaller house and worked as a teacher at a private elementary school for the wealthy under Fuyang, and she loved her new job and remained a teacher for years until journalists discovered her existence and had to resign from her work, and entered into a cycle of poverty, and she received a request from other men to marry her, but she refused. She worked as a cigarette saleswoman for a while before working as a linguist for a printing factory. During those years, Japan occupied China and committed massacres against the Chinese. Puyi began to see the truth that Wenzhou was warning him about. Wenzhou met her death in Manchukuo after Puyi escaped and left her behind before the Chinese caught him and punished him as a traitor because of his cooperation with the Japanese. He was imprisoned for years and then released. When the divorce took place between Wenzhou and Puyi, Wenzhou was 23 years old, and years passed when she lived alone with her sister Wenzhou, and she did not think of marrying again until she met a former soldier named Liu Zhendong, who was 40 years old and never married, and drew his attention after he discovered that she was proficient in speaking English, especially she works as a proofreader in a factory. And Wenzhou learned English with Puyi's encouragement at the beginning of their marriage when they were still living in the Forbidden City before they were expelled from it, and she learned it at the hands of Puyi's English teacher. Liu Zhendong was a car dealer and worked in this profession after the end of World War II and met Wenzhou through a mutual friend, and at that time Wenzhou was in her late 30s and did not marry, keeping her promise to Puyi that she would not marry again. And even then many did not know about her identity after the divorce, because she kept using her pseudonym Fuyan, and she aroused his interest because she loved books, and because she spoke English. He thought that she was a researcher or scientist. When he asked her about her past, Wenzhou changed the subject and realized that she did not want to talk about her past, so he did not ask her again. Despite this, he kept insisting on meeting her, and she refused him at first until she agreed to meet him and fell in love with him to the extent that she broke her promise and married him in 1947 AD. He questioned Zhendong because of his past as a soldier, and after the interrogation ended, the new government appointed him as a cleaner in the capital, Beijing. So the couple moved to a small apartment and suffered from poverty, and here Wenzhou's health began to deteriorate, and her husband was unable to provide money for her. But according to Wenzhou, poverty with an interested husband was much easier than wealth with a neglected husband, and before Wenzhou's death, she confessed to her husband about her past and that she was Puyi's wife, who divorced him in 1931 AD. Zhendong was amazed at what she said, especially since he thought she was a scientist in the past. Wenzhou died in September 1953 AD before she completed 44 years old. As for her husband Zhendong, because of their poverty, was unable to buy a shroud for her, so he made a shroud for her himself, and she was buried in an ordinary cemetery. Zhendong did not marry after Wenzhou, and he kept talking about her proudly among his neighbors, and he mentioned her for the rest of his life, and he reminded his neighbors that he was sitting in front of his house and talking about Wenzhou, and before his death he told one of his neighbors that he had gained good luck because he married an ex-wife of an emperor, and this is something that did not happen to any other man of his type in Chinese history. From the moment he married Wenzhou, he had no regrets in his life.